The night air at Vauxhall Gardens was heavy with the perfume of roses, warm wax and lamp oil. Lanterns glowed like floating moons above winding paths, while masked guests drifted through the gardens laughing, flirting, disappearing into music and shadow. It was meant to be a place of delight. For Miss Georgiana Sutton, it felt like a place of judgment. She stood near a trellis of climbing roses, her plain domino cloak pulled close around her shoulders. Beneath it, her gown was modest, carefully mended, and unmistakably unfashionable among the silks and satins of the ton. At 23, Georgiana knew exactly how London saw her. Not as a young woman. Not as a volunteer who spent her Tuesdays and Thursdays reading to orphan children. Not as someone kind, or gentle, or worthy, but as the daughter of a traitor. Her father, Sir Edmund Sutton, had fled England 5 years earlier under suspicion of treason. He had not been proven guilty. He had not been proven innocent. He had simply vanished. And London had passed sentence on the family he left behind. Friends disappeared. Invitations stopped. Doors closed with polite smiles and permanent finality. The stain of her father's disgrace clung to Georgiana like an invisible perfume. Undetectable to the eye, yet impossible to ignore. With her aunt confined as an invalid in distant Cornwall, Georgiana stood entirely alone in the world, which made the invitation stranger still. The white cliff crest. The seal of the Marquis of Wycliffe. She had turned the card over and over before coming, certain it must be a mistake. Men like the Marquis did not notice women like her. They certainly did not invite them. Yet here she was, trying not to feel like prey. She was just beginning to consider leaving when she sensed it. The subtle shift in the air. The way laughter nearby dimmed. The way shadows thickened at the edges of the paths. 3 figures emerged from the darker walkway beyond the arbor. They did not drift. They did not wander. They moved with purpose. Lord Ravenska. Sir Neville Crofton. Mr. Hartley Vane. Georgiana recognized them instantly, and felt the blood drain from her face. They spread out as they approached, not rushing, not speaking, positioning themselves with quiet calculation. Closing off the paths. Blocking the light. Sealing the space. Her fingers tightened around her fan. "My lords," she said carefully, her voice steady though her pulse thundered. "You seem to have mistaken this for a private arbor." Ravenska smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Miss Sutton," he drawled, wine roughening his voice. "How unexpected to find you here. Vauxhall is rather elevated for your current circumstances." "I was invited," Georgiana replied. "And I have every right to be." "Rights?" Crofton laughed, harsh and humorless. "Your father owed my family £5,000 when he ran like a coward. A debt of honor does not vanish because a man flees." "I am not responsible for my father's accounts," Georgiana said, stepping back until the trellis brushed her shoulders. "That is not the law." Vane moved closer. "We are not in a court, Miss Sutton," he said softly. "We are in the dark." Her breath hitched. "And you have no one to defend you." The blow came without warning. Ravenska's hand struck her cheek with brutal force. The impact sent her stumbling back into the roses. "Tårens store Targon." Pain exploded across her face. She tasted blood as her lips split against her teeth. Before she could cry out, Crofton's boot caught her ribs as she tried to rise. The air left her lungs in a broken gasp. She fell again. Mud soaked into silk. Thorns bit into her palms. Hands seized her arms, her bodice, her shoulders, forcing her down. "You thought smiling at the Marquis would save you?" Vine hissed. "Thought charity work made you untouchable." Another kick. Another wrench of fabric. Another burst of pain. "You are nothing," Ravenska said coldly. "And you will always be nothing." The sound of carriage wheels on gravel cut through the night. Sharp. Close. All 3 men froze. A heartbeat. Then another. They exchanged glances and fled, melting into the garden like smoke. Georgiana lay among the crushed roses, shaking. Her cheek burned. Her ribs screamed with every breath. Blood dripped from her lip onto the torn bodice of her gown. She tried to stand. Her legs failed. Tears blurred the lantern light into shapeless stars. Footsteps approached. Measured. Unhurried. A tall figure appeared at the entrance to the arbor, framed by lamplight. He stopped, as if he had struck an invisible wall. Steel-gray eyes swept the scene. The torn gown, the blood, the way she cradled her ribs, the thorns in her hands. Something changed in his face. Something ancient. Something lethal. When he moved, it was not with panic. It was with the controlled precision of a predator who had found his wounded. He crossed the distance in 3 strides and knelt in the mud beside her, heedless of his immaculate clothes. His fingers lifted her chin, tilting her face gently into the light. His touch was clinical, terrifyingly gentle. "Who did this to you?" he asked. His voice was soft, which somehow made it far more frightening. Julian, Marquis of Wycliffe, had seen battlefields. He had stood among cannon smoke and dying men. But nothing he had ever witnessed compared to the sight of Georgiana Sutton broken among crushed roses. "Who did this to you?" he asked again. This time iron edged the silk. Georgiana tried to speak. Pain swelled in her chest. Her throat closed. The world tilted. "Easy," he murmured instantly, adjusting his grip as her body swayed. "Do not force yourself." His hand slipped from her chin to her back, steadying her with infinite care. Her voice came out barely above breath. "Lord Ravenska," she whispered. "Sir Neville Crofton. Mr. Hartlevine. They said your protection ended tonight." For a long moment, Julian said nothing. He simply looked at her. And something in those storm-gray eyes went utterly still. A decision was being made. A line was being crossed. He rose in one smooth motion and removed his greatcoat, wrapping it around her trembling form. When he lifted her, she made a small, involuntary sound of pain. Instantly his arms adjusted, precise, controlled, finding a position that hurt her less. "I am taking you to Wycliffe House," he said. "Mrs. Dalton will tend you. You will remain there until you are healed." She tried to protest. He cut her off quietly. "Do not." The single word carried finality. She had no strength left to argue. She let her head rest against his shoulder. The scent of sandalwood and night air filled her lungs. She had loved this man from a distance for 5 years, never daring to hope he even knew her name. Now his arms were the only thing holding her upright. The carriage ride passed in a haze of pain and exhaustion. Julian held her carefully, one arm supporting her shoulders, the other beneath her knees. He did not speak, but tension radiated from him like heat from a forge. At Wycliffe House, he carried her straight through the entrance hall, ignoring the startled expressions of his servants. Mrs. Dalton, his housekeeper of 20 years, took one look at Georgiana's face and went utterly still. Then she moved. Hot water, clean linens, medical supplies. Her voice cracked like a whip, and the household leapt into motion. Julian laid Georgiana upon a chaise in a guest bedchamber with infinite care. He studied her for a long moment. Then he turned toward the door. "My lord," Mrs. Dalton called. "Where are you going at this hour?" "Out," he replied. "I have errands." And he was gone. Georgiana heard his footsteps echo down the marble stairs. Then the front door closed. With quiet finality, London did not sleep. And neither did Julian. 2 hours past midnight, his carriage stopped before a modest townhouse in Holborn. He rapped sharply. A blurred-eyed clerk opened the door. "Wake Mr. Finch," Julian said. "Tell him the Marquis of Wycliffe requires his immediate assistance." 20 minutes later, Samuel Finch sat across from him, pale and hastily dressed. Julian's voice was precise. "I require every record of debt held by Lord Ravenska, Sir Neville Crofton, and Mr. Hartley Vane. Every note, every unpaid bill, every property lien, every forged signature." "My lord, such work would take weeks." "You have 6 hours," Julian interrupted. "I will pay triple. Wake every clerk in London if you must." Finch looked into his eyes and reached for his coat. Julian's next stop was 7 Dials, a place where information could be bought with gin and silence. He found Sergeant Briggs, retired military, seated in a back corner. "I need men," Julian said. "Men who can watch 3 houses without being seen. Every visitor, every letter, every movement." Briggs studied him, then nodded once. "How many?" 6. "They start tonight." By 3 in the morning, Julian stood before Lord Hawthorne, owner of the largest private bank in Mayfair. A bank draft lay open on the desk. The number made Hawthorne's breath catch. "Ravenska's notes," Julian said quietly. "Call them in tomorrow." "My lord, that will ruin him." "Yes," Julian replied. "It will." The drawer unlocked. At 4, a printing house on Fleet Street. By 5, Bow Street magistrates. By dawn, a bishop's ear bent toward inconvenient truths. Everywhere Julian went, doors opened. Not from affection. From fear. From debt. From reputation. Between each errand, he returned briefly to Wycliffe House. He paused outside the guest chamber, listening. Only when he heard Georgiana's breathing did he leave again. Mounting his horse, riding back into the dark. Dawn broke pale and cold over London. Julian had not slept. He had not eaten. But by sunrise, the weapon was complete. Not of steel. Of ink. Ledgers. Warrants. And whispers. Lord Ravenska awoke to shouting. Broadsheets flooded the street. Evidence of extensive forgery and financial fraud. Every signature. Every theft. Every crime. Laid bare. Before noon, warrants were signed. By evening, Ravenska was finished. Sir Neville Crofton found his estate called in. 60 days. Or everything seized. Mr. Hartley Vane's credit vanished. His allies disowned him. His world collapsed in a single morning. London buzzed. Who had done this? No one spoke the name. But everyone knew. At Wycliffe House, Georgiana slept through it all. Mrs. Dalton bathed her wounds. Bound her ribs. Held broth to her lips. The first week was agony. Every breath hurt. Every movement burned. Her face swelled until her left eye closed. She drifted in and out of fevered dreams where roses became thorns and voices whispered that she was nothing. Mrs. Dalton was always there. Cool cloth. Warm hands. Silent comfort. By the second week, she could sit without gasping. The bruises softened from black to purple. Then to yellow. The body healed. Something else hardened. A core of steel where once there had been only endurance. Julian did not visit. Mrs. Dalton said only that he asked after her. Every evening. And did not wish to disturb her rest. By the third week, Georgiana could walk the length of the room without losing her breath. The bruises on her face had faded into faint shadows easily hidden with powder. The cut on her lip had healed into a thin pink line. Her ribs still ached, but no longer ruled her movements. Physically, she was nearly whole again. Inside, she was not the same woman who had entered Vauxhall Gardens. Something had changed. She no longer felt made of glass. She felt forged. On a gray morning in early September, rain whispering against the windows, Georgiana finally dressed herself without Mrs. Dalton's assistance. She chose a simple gown and brushed her hair until it shone softly in the dim light. She studied her reflection. Not looking for beauty, looking for herself. And she found her. A woman who had been broken. And had not remained so. A knock sounded. "Miss Sutton," Mrs. Dalton called gently. "His lordship has returned. He requests the pleasure of your company in the library, if you are well enough." Georgiana's heart stuttered. "Please tell him. I will come directly." The walk down the grand staircase felt longer than any journey she had ever taken. Painted ancestors watched her descent. Cold men. Powerful men. All bearing the same white cliff crest. The library door stood open. Julian stood behind a massive desk, papers scattered beneath his hands. He looked altered. Shadows marked his eyes. Tension lived around his mouth. When he saw her, something flickered across his face too quickly to name. He straightened. "Miss Sutton," he said quietly. "Mrs. Dalton tells me you are much improved." "Thanks to her," Georgiana replied. "And to you for providing me sanctuary." "My reputation can withstand scandal," he said dismissively. "It is yours that concerns me." He gestured to a chair near the fire. "Please sit. We have matters to discuss." Georgiana did. Julian did not. He stood with one hand braced against the mantelpiece, gaze fixed on the flames. "I imagine you have heard certain reports." "Some," Georgiana admitted. "Enough to understand that the men who attacked me have been ruined." "Yes." "And that you orchestrated it." Julian finally turned. "Does that trouble you?" She met his eyes steadily. I did not ask for vengeance. No, he agreed. You did not. But, she continued slowly, I cannot pretend I am sorry they were stopped. Something unreadable crossed his face. Some would say I went too far, he said quietly. That bankruptcy, exile, and disgrace are excessive punishments. And what would you say? Georgiana asked. He held her gaze. I would say they are fortunate. Her breath caught. I am civilized, Julian continued softly. There are places where what they did to you would earn them a bullet, not a balance sheet. He turned back to the window. There is something you should know, Miss Sutton. Something I should have told you years ago. Her pulse quickened. For 5 years, he said, I have watched you. She went very still. I saw you first at church, sitting alone, wearing a gown mended so many times it was more thread than fabric. Your father's disgrace had cost you your friends. Yet you held your head high. You sang as if shame could not reach you. He turned. And I thought, there is a woman of uncommon courage. Her fingers curled into her skirts. I began to encounter you again. In the park. At the lending library. Outside the Foundling Hospital. Always alone. Always steady. I kept my distance because I knew my attention would only bring you further scrutiny. He crossed the room slowly. I told myself it was for your own good. He stopped before her. In truth, I did not trust myself to approach you. Her voice trembled. Why? Because you reminded me that strength does not require armor, he said simply. Because in a world of painted faces, you were genuine. Because I had built my life on ice after my brother died. And you were warmth without trying. Her eyes burned. I became your anonymous benefactor, Julian continued. Ensured certain bills were paid. Certain invitations arrived. Certain landlords were persuaded. I protected you from a distance, because I feared what would happen if I did not. Georgiana stared. You have been protecting me for 5 years? Yes. The invitation to Vauxhall? Yes, he said quietly. And I regret it more than any action of my life. She stood. That night was not your fault. It is mine to bear, he replied. Because I was not there sooner. His hands clenched. When I saw you in those roses, something broke inside me. He drew a breath. Or perhaps something finally healed. He knelt. The movement was so unexpected that Georgiana forgot to breathe. The Marquis of Wycliffe knelt before her, taking her hands. You are not unworthy, Georgiana Sutton, he said, his voice rough. You are extraordinary. Your father's crimes are not yours. His dishonor does not diminish your honor. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I am still a trader's daughter, she whispered. I have no dowry, no prospects, no family worth naming. If you marry me, society will shun you. Let them, Julian said fiercely. Their approval means nothing to me. He reached into his coat. A small velvet box. Inside lay a ring of gold, black enamel, and a single flawless diamond. The white cliff crest engraved within. Marry me, he said. Not because I saved you. Not because you need my protection. But because I cannot imagine another dawn without you beside me. Her breath shook. You have made me a man instead of a monument. I offer you my name, my fortune, my life, and my heart. Such as it is, it has been yours for 5 years. Silence. Then Georgiana laughed softly through tears. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Julian. 1,000 times yes. She leaned forward and kissed him. Soft. Salt and hope and something infinitely sweeter. He rose, drawing her into his arms. And for the first time since her father fled England, Georgiana Sutton felt chosen. They were married 3 weeks later. Not in a glittering cathedral. Not before half the ton. But in the small private chapel of Wycliffe House. Only Mrs. Dalton, the parish priest, Julian's solicitor, and a handful of his closest associates were present. Georgiana walked down the short aisle alone. Not because no one stood for her, but because she no longer needed anyone to hold her up. Her gown was ivory silk, simple and elegant, seed pearls stitched along the bodice and sleeves. No borrowed finery. No desperate display. Only herself. Julian waited at the altar in dark blue superfine, his cravat tied with mathematical precision. But it was his eyes that undid her. The same storm-gray eyes that once seemed carved of ice now held only warmth and certainty. They spoke their vows clearly, steadily. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Julian lifted her veil with hands that trembled. He kissed her as if she were not something he had won, but something he had finally been entrusted with. Mrs. Dalton dabbed her eyes. Even stern Mr. Finch smiled. The wedding breakfast was intimate. Candlesticks from Julian's grandmother. A quiet toast to their future. No spectacle. Only meaning. And when the last guest had departed, Julian led her upstairs to the Marchioness's suite. Georgiana caught her breath. Large windows overlooked the gardens. Bookshelves lined the walls. A writing desk waited by the light. A canopied bed hung in deep green velvet. I had Mrs. Dalton furnish the rooms according to what she knew of your tastes, Julian said. If anything displeases you. It is perfect, Georgiana whispered. He crossed to her. You are perfect. That night, London continued its endless dance of gossip and ambition. But in Wycliffe House, two people who had lived in shadow stood in the light. Together, they remained in London for the season. Julian had business in Parliament. Georgiana had a reckoning with society. Her first public appearance as Marchioness of Wycliffe came at the Duchess of Hertford's ball, but in the small private chapel of Wycliffe House. Only Mrs. Dalton, the parish priest, Julian's solicitor, and a handful of his closest associates were present. Georgiana walked down the short aisle alone, not because no one stood for her, but because she no longer needed anyone to hold her up. Her gown was ivory silk, simple and elegant, seed pearls stitched along the bodice and sleeves. No bodo fiancé, no desperate display, only herself. Julian waited at the altar in dark blue superfine, his cravat tied with mathematical precision. But it was his eyes that undid her. The same storm-gray eyes that once seemed carved of ice now held only warmth and certainty. They spoke their vows clearly, steadily. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Julian lifted her veil with hands that trembled. He kissed her as if she were not something he had won, but something he had finally been entrusted with. Mrs. Dalton dabbed her eyes. Even stern Mr. Finch smiled. The wedding breakfast was intimate. Candlesticks from Julian's grandmother. A quiet toast to their future. No spectacle. Only meaning. And when the last guest had departed, Julian led her upstairs to the Marchioness's suite. Georgiana caught her breath. Large windows overlooked the gardens. Bookshelves lined the walls. A writing desk waited by the light. A canopied bed hung in deep green velvet. I had Mrs. Dalton furnish the rooms according to what she knew of your tastes, Julian said. If anything displeases you. It is perfect, Georgiana whispered. He crossed to her. You are perfect. That night, London continued its endless dance of gossip and ambition. But in Wycliffe House, two people who had lived in shadow stood in the light. Together, they remained in London for the season. Julian had business in Parliament. Georgiana had a reckoning with society. Her first public appearance as Marchioness of Wycliffe came at the Duchess of Hertford's ball. Julian warned her gently. If the Duchess accepts you, the rest will follow. Georgiana dressed carefully. Sapphire silk. The white cliff sapphires at her throat. Her hair arranged simply. When she descended the staircase, Julian forgot to hide his expression. You are magnificent, he said. I am nervous. Do not be. There is nothing in that ballroom that can diminish you. He offered his arm. They entered to sudden stillness. The Marquis and Marchioness of Wycliffe. Every head turned. The Duchess approached, studied Georgiana, then smiled. My dear child, she said warmly. I knew your mother. I see you have inherited her taste, and her spine. It was approval. Public. Decisive. Relief flooded Georgiana's chest. Later, Julian led her onto the floor for the first waltz. I will step on your feet, she whispered. Then I will catch you, he murmured. He always did. By the third turn, fear had left her. She moved in his arms as if she had always belonged there. And London watched. Georgiana returned to the Foundling Hospital the following Tuesday, as she always had. But now she arrived in the White Cliff carriage. She did not stop being Miss Georgiana. She simply became Lady Wycliffe. And she used that power. She employed women who had nowhere else to go. created a nursery in the house, built quiet revolutions behind aristocratic walls. Society whispered. But it whispered carefully, because everyone remembered what happened to the last men who mistook the Marchioness for unprotected. Autumn arrived quietly, not with scandal, not with storms, but with letters. One morning, as Georgiana sat writing to the Foundling Hospital, Julian set his newspaper down with unusual slowness. "There is news from Calais," he said. She looked up. "What news?" "Mr. Hartley Vane is dead. His ship was lost in a storm 3 days after leaving port. There were no survivors." The room went very still. Georgiana laid her pen aside. "I see." Julian watched her carefully. "Do you feel regret?" "The same wind. The same roses blooming where thorns once ruled." "Do you ever think about that night?" Georgiana asked quietly. "Less often now," Julian said. "The memory has lost its power." "Because justice was done?" "Because love was found," he corrected. She leaned into him. "The thorns are gone," she whispered. "Only the roses remain." They stood wrapped in each other as the manor glowed behind them, filled with children's dreams and honest work and earned peace. Two people who had been broken, who had refused to remain so, who had built something beautiful from pain. And in the end, it was not revenge that defined their story. It was what came after. Love, legacy, and the quiet miracle of being seen.